great flood was supposed to be God's final answer, a divine apocalypse, water swallowing the horizon, built to erase something so monstrous, so fundamentally wrong, that the world itself could not continue alongside it. God called them the Nephilim, and He drowned everything to destroy them. But here is what should terrify you: it didn't work. Centuries after the waters pulled back, in the pages of the same Bible that described their annihilation, their name surfaces again. Not as legend, not as a half-remembered nightmare, as a living, breathing terror, standing in the path of God's own chosen people. The Nephilim survived the flood. Tonight, we pull apart 4 chilling theories from the scriptures themselves. 4 dark answers to one impossible question. How do you outlive the apocalypse built to kill your kind? Chapter 1. The First Monsters. Before the world drowned, it was already rotting. Genesis chapter 6 describes a world spiraling so far from its design that its creator had no choice but to intervene. The corruption was total, the decay of everything God had made, and at the center of it all was a transgression that should have been impossible. Genesis 6:4, the Nephilim, born from a forbidden union, divine beings, the sons of God, who abandoned their purpose and descended to take human wives. Their children were not human. They were aberrations, immense, unnatural, their very existence a rupture in the fabric of creation. Ancient texts outside the Bible describe them in terms far darker than mighty men, creatures of insatiable hunger, their presence on earth a living corruption of bloodlines that threatened to consume humanity itself. This was the reason for the flood, not merely to punish sin, but to perform a desperate act of celestial purging, to cut the corrupted line from the world entirely, to wipe the slate clean with one righteous man, Noah. And the Bible is explicit. Every living thing on dry land perished. The waters rose, the monsters drowned, the world was reset, or so we were told. Chapter 2. The Impossible Return. Centuries pass. Noah's sons repopulate the earth. Humanity walks into its second chance. The Nephilim should be nothing but a pre-flood horror story, a nightmare sealed beneath endless fathoms of sediment. Then we arrive at the book of Numbers. Moses has led his people to the edge of the Promised Land. He sends 12 spies to scout the territory. 10 of them return, and what they bring back is not a report. It is a confession of pure, shattered terror. Numbers 13:33. And there we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, who come from the Nephilim. And we seemed to ourselves like grasshoppers, and so we seemed to them. Let that land. Not tall men, not a fierce tribe. The spies used the specific, cursed name Nephilim, the same name the flood was supposed to have buried forever. The very horror God rewrote the world to destroy was standing there, alive, watching. Their shadow had fallen over the Promised Land. If the flood ended all life, how is this possible? The Bible doesn't give you a clean answer, but it leaves a trail of dark and twisting clues, and they point toward 4 deeply unsettling theories. Chapter 3. The Second Incursion. The first theory is the most direct, and in many ways the most disturbing. The fall happened again. Genesis 6:4 contains a phrase that most readers pass over without a second thought. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward. That phrase is not a footnote, it is a warning. And also afterward suggests the transgression of the sons of God was never a single event. It was a pattern, a recurring catastrophe. The ancient texts describe the original transgressors as beings bound in eternal chains beneath the earth, but this may have applied only to that first wave. Others, equally corrupted, remained free, and they came down again. In this theory, a second generation of fallen beings repeated the sin after the flood. not on a world-spanning scale, but concentrated in Canaan, in the very land God had promised to his people. The flood worked. The original horror was erased, but the impulse behind it survived in other darker corners of the heavenly order, and so, quietly, the nightmare was rebuilt. Chapter 4: The Unseen Passenger. The second theory does not look to the heavens for its answer. It looks at the ark. This is perhaps the darkest of all four explanations, because it implies that even in the moment of salvation, something unholy slipped through. Genesis 6:9 describes Noah as blameless in his generation. Many scholars interpret this to mean his lineage was untouched by the corruption spreading through the rest of humanity. But the text says nothing about the women, nothing about the wives of his 3 sons. 4 women stepped onto the ark, and the scriptures are silent about all of them. The theory is this: one of those women, most often identified as the wife of Ham, carried the ancient corruption in her blood. Not visibly, not in any way that Noah could have detected. She was not a giant. She was a carrier, a vessel for something dormant, something patient, something waiting for the new world to lower its guard. She walked off the ark into a cleansed earth, and she brought the old shadow with her. This explains why the post-flood giants, the Anakim, the Rephaim, the Zamzummim, appear not scattered randomly, but concentrated in specific lineages, many traced back to the sons of Ham. The corruption was not introduced from outside after the flood. It was already there, already inherited, already written into the blood of the family chosen to carry humanity forward. The ark was not only a sanctuary, it was the vessel that carried the old world's darkness into the new one. Chapter 5: The Broken Minds. The third theory takes a completely different path. What if the spies were wrong? The Hebrew word used to describe their report, dibba, is most accurately translated not as a scouting report, but as an evil report. A slander. A distorted account shaped by panic and dread. The spies were not analysts delivering cold intelligence. They were men who walked into a land of massive, powerful people, the Anakim, and came back psychologically shattered. Their minds reached for the worst word they knew, the most terrifying name in human memory, one that had survived the flood not as a living thing, but as a legend. A warning passed down through generations of oral tradition: Nephilim. When they screamed that name before Moses, they may not have meant it literally. They meant, we saw something that should not exist, something our minds could not accept. They weaponized a myth to communicate a terror that normal language could not contain. In this reading, the Nephilim of the post-flood world are not a bloodline. They are a reflection of how completely the memory of the original monsters had shattered human courage. Even the idea of them, centuries removed, could collapse the faith of an entire nation. The most powerful monster in the room is sometimes the one that isn't there. Chapter 6: The Unreached Corners. The fourth theory is the simplest, and in its simplicity perhaps the most quietly horrifying. What if the flood wasn't global? The people of the ancient Near East described a catastrophic, world-ending deluge. But the whole earth, in their understanding, may have meant nothing more than the world they knew, the land within their horizon, the civilization they occupied. If the flood was a massive regional event centered on Mesopotamia, the answer to the Nephilim's survival is brutally simple. Entire clans living in Canaan and beyond were never touched by the waters. While Noah's world was swept clean, other parts of the earth were simply beyond the flood's reach. The monsters didn't survive the apocalypse. The apocalypse never found them. This theory solves the puzzle, but it introduces a darker unease. It means that while God's judgment reshaped one corner of the world, Something ancient and monstrous was thriving undisturbed in another, multiplying, spreading into the very land that would one day be called the Promised Land. Not as an ambush, not as a conspiracy, just as something old left in the dark, waiting to be inherited. Chapter 7. What was left behind? The flood came. The waters rose higher than any mountain, and by every account the world was reborn. But the Nephilim were in Canaan. The spies saw them. The text names them. And their presence there forced an entire generation of God's people to face something no one had prepared them for. The old world was not gone. It was waiting on the other side of the border they were commanded to cross. The battle against these giant clans did not end with the flood. It was handed forward to Joshua, to Caleb, to King David himself, who would face the last of their lineage in some of the most chilling confrontations in all of Scripture. The Nephilim were not a prologue. They were a recurring inheritance. And what the Bible leaves us with is not a resolution. It is a warning. Some darkness is written so deeply into the structure of the world that even God's flood cannot reach it. It endures. It adapts. It waits. And sooner or later it steps back out of the shadows. What do you believe? Was it a second fall from the heavens? A hidden lineage smuggled aboard the ark itself? A lie born from minds broken by fear? Or something the flood simply never reached? Leave your theory in the comments. This is exactly the kind of darkness we dig into here.